Good afternoon, everyone. In Bangkok, in the UN Conference Center, or those online. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this side event to the Committee on Trade and Investment. So, as you know, we are going to launch and discuss a joint report by ECA, ECLAC, and ESCAP on digital trade integration, right? And this is based on the Regional Digital Trade Integration Index that was developed jointly by all three regional commissions in cooperation with quite a number of other partners that hopefully will join us also on the last day of this event. We're starting today with a 1-hour session to essentially launch the report, go over the report, and then there will be subsequent sessions dedicated to each region, and there will be also consultation on the last day, on 24 February morning, on the way forward in terms of how do we maintain the Regional Digital Trade Integration Index data, and how we expand the data set from, I think, 60 countries now to more countries, depending on the interest. So with this brief remark, I'm going to go over a few slides of background, right? So this is the session, the 1-hour session that is starting now, right? We will have speakers, Witada from ESCAP, my colleague from ESCAP, Nano, Johan Mulder from ECLAC, Latin America, and also Simon Mevel from ECA, Africa, presenting. We are very happy to have Simon in person with us in Bangkok. So that's very good. And then, but I understand Nano will be is a pre-recorded presentation because the time is not exactly right for Latin America. And then we're also very happy to see that we have Henry Gao from Singapore Management University as a discussant. I don't see him in the room, but he will be joining us, right?
Yes.
Okay. He will be joining us very soon. But it's okay. There is still a bit of time. We trust he will come. Has anybody seen him so far?
I haven't seen him.
Okay, let's reach out to him to make sure that he's able to join us physically or online is okay. Both works. All right. So this is all the different sessions that will take place. I will not go through the different sessions because it's going to take a bit long, right? I'm just very happy that we have very good representation from colleagues from Africa. And then this has been a long time, interest from us, right, to strengthen the collaboration between Africa and Asia, right? There's a lot of developing countries in both regions, very fast-growing economies in both regions. I think we need to really strengthen this exchange of knowledge and information between Asia and Africa. So the more we can do that, the better. Okay, so what is this initiative about, right? This joint initiative of three regional commissions. So it's about trying to understand better what is going on in the area of digital trade regulation, digital trade policies, digital trade regulation. A lot of countries are putting regulatory frameworks in place, but there's really no international standard to actually guide the countries at this stage, because this is in response to new technology, to the digitalization of economies and so on. So there's quite a bit of variation. So it's really important to look into this. And the idea of the initiative is to promote a holistic and evidence-based digital trade policy formulation. It's to identify the regulatory bottlenecks, and regulatory bottlenecks here, we are talking about regulatory bottlenecks for firms, right? For SMEs in particular. And also to identify areas that are most important for domestic regulatory reform, right? And then the last objective of the initiative is really to facilitate regional cooperation to enhance digital trust and interoperability within and between regions. Again, a lot of the countries are developing their own digital trade regulatory framework based on their policy needs, their policy priorities. But what's important for regional cooperation and integration is to see, to make sure that the digital trade regulatory framework that are being developed, are interoperable in the sense that we want to be able to let SMEs, right, from all the countries to benefit from digital trade and benefit from digital economy. So enabling SMEs to actually engage in digital trade, not within only their domestic economy, but also across border is something that is important. It's something that is not going to be feasible for SMEs in particular if the digital trade regulations are very, very different across countries. Because it's going to be just too challenging and onerous to engage for smaller firms. So this is something that is quite an important objective of the initiative. If I look at the background for this, I'm missing a little bit of the slide. So I'm not sure whether I'm missing the first point, Witada, but really a lot of this started with technical collaboration with OECD in relation to their digital services trade restrictiveness index, right? OECD has done a lot of work on digital trade services, and so we collaborated with them to actually add additional countries to their data set from the Asia and the Pacific region. I think same thing with ECA and ECLAC. But at the same time, what we observed is that digital services trade index is quite a relatively narrow focus, right? And so it's important to have a more holistic view of all the digital trade regulations or the regulation and policy that affects digital trade. And that's how the digital trade integration index, idea formed up, and that's how we started collaborating among the three regional commission on this. So in 2022, we developed a first version of the regional digital trade integration index. And so this is all available online. It's fully transparent. You can see how it's built and everything. And then we actually co-published with OECD an Asia Pacific Digital Trade Regulatory Review 2022. So one part of the joint report is on RDTII, right? And the other part is on the regional digital trade integration index, because we feel this is quite complementary. And then we expanded this work to collaborate with the European University Institute, I believe I'm saying this correctly, right? EUI, and to refine a little bit. So it's quite minor, but to refine the regional digital trade integration index from 1.0 version to 2.0 version, trying to pick, more specific indicators, more measurable indicators to the extent possible, to make things as clear as possible. And so today, what we have, the result of this is that we were able to published together ESCAP-ECA-ECLAC, the digital trade regulatory review for Asia Pacific, Africa, and LAC, but Latin America and the Caribbean, right? I don't know whether we discriminate by putting it this way, but that's what it is now at this point, right? And so what we're also going to do, and this is, I think Simon will show us something, right? We're also developing a joint data portal that is not online yet, but will be soon online, covering 69 economies. So I think it's a pretty good representative sample of what's going on in our three developing regions. This is just a broad picture of the RDTII 2.0 framework. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, right? There are 12 different pillars. As you can see, there is really a lot of different indicators. So it took a lot of time to collect all this data and to verify all this data. So thank you very much, Witada and Simon and whoever else was involved in putting this together, because it's really a lot of hard work. But I think it was worth the effort. We will publish an RDTII 2.0 guide I think soon, right? In the coming weeks or months, for those of you who want the full details. But otherwise, you can refer to the RDTII 1.0 at this point, which is very, very similar in any case. So looking at the finding of the data for this from the 69 countries, we find commonalities, right? I believe. So some of the highlight is really that regulatory interventions that may affect competition are particularly prominent in the telecom sector and the policies related to intermediary liability, right? So there's a lot of policies and regulation related to digital trade that have been issued, seek to limit competition in many ways, right? And so whether this is something that countries really want to do and that is beneficial for everyone or not, this is to be discussed further, right? But this is one of the findings we have. What we also find is that countries recognize the importance of reducing procedural delays and aligning with international standards, right? So many countries have taken quite good steps, active steps in this area, and so this is commendable. And then what we also find from the analysis of the data across the three regions is that we see a lot of differences in the three regions regarding regulatory tools used and the degree to which governments in each region have established facilitative legislative frameworks. And then, so again, I think cross-learning across the region is something that is very valuable and can provide a lot of guidance going forward. So some of the common recommendations that emerge from the report is first, that there is a need to lower barriers to trade in information and communication technology goods and digital trade-related services. I mean, this is a basic infrastructure, the basic things you need to actually engage in digital trade, right? If you have very high barriers to trade in this, a lot of firms will not be able to access those. If they cannot access those, they can't just engage in digital trade. That's as simple as this. The second common recommendation that emerged is that there is a need to implement an accommodative foreign direct investment policy within the telecommunications and digital services sector to enhance access and affordability to telecom infrastructure. So again, it's very much related to the first point, right? You need those basic infrastructure in place. If you allow bringing in FDI, then you can get access to the latest technologies and the latest infrastructure quicker, right? Potentially, right? Assuming you're able to attract this FDI, which is still challenging. And then the last recommendation that comes out is the need to promote the adoption of conducive legal frameworks for digital governance. Depending on the countries, many countries use this legal framework for digital governance is just not there at all, which create a lot of uncertainties and risk. And in some other countries, actually, it's a lot of regulations, right? And so then it's like over digital governance in a way, right? So you've got those two sides of the coins here. And so what is the optimal conducive legal framework for digital trade and digital government is really a big question. But if we can have some level of harmonization regionally and interregionally, I think it will benefit everyone. So let me stop here. Thank you very much. And I think the next step, right, is to hear from the report's drafters and the different regions, right? So Witada, I think from Asia Pacific is first. I don't know why. Maybe we should have been more polite and move to some and do another order. But Witada is first. Then there's going to be Simon. I believe. Oh no, ECLAC recording, and then Simon. All right.
Thank you. This is the very summary results from Asia Pacific, because if you have a chance after this meeting, you look at the report, you will see a lot of information that we present, and I only have not more than 10 minutes. So this would be very, very brief snapshots of what we found from Asia Pacific. Every region, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and Africa, we use the same framework, right? And same methodologies of data collections and analysis. So the results, the numbers, the score that we have will be comparable across the regions. The score that we have two important index in the report. One is the RDTII score, which is the Regional Digital Trade Integration Index score. We have score from 0 to 1, when 0 is meaning the complex regulatory environment, a lot of interventions, and 1 is, is the different. 0 is very minimal interventions, and 1 is very high intervention, so it's more complex environment. Then another index is we use the information that we develop RDTII to map policy similarity between country pairs. The index is showing how high likelihood of policy similar between two countries. So 1 would be very similar and 0 would be no similar at all based on the information in the index, which cover 12 policy areas. And in Asia Pacific, I mark it in red with purpose because for Asia Pacific, we found that both the regulatory environment and RDTII similarity shows more concerning issues. RDTII, which we interpret it as the higher degree of RDTII score is representing high compliance costs for business to come across those regulations, comply with those regulations. And the degree of that cost is relatively higher than other two regions. We are slightly higher than Africa, but we much higher from Latin America. The similarity scores also shows that Asia Pacific is having more diverse policy environment. The difference between RDTII similarity score in Asia Pacific and other two regions is quite substantial. So this confirms about diverse policy positions in the regions. So then let's dig a little bit deeper. From the 12 policy areas that we cover in this database, we group them into 3 policy clusters for easier representations. Policy cluster 1, we have measures that are quite familiar for policymakers, especially from trade ministries or negotiators, because it's tariff measures, non-tariff measures, standards, and trade facilitation procedures, or those kind of areas. In this graph, this cluster is in blue. And the second group is in yellow, which is domestic regulation, such as regulation in telecoms and competition laws, regulations about investment, foreign direct investment, regulations on IP, that kind of, again, familiar rules for policymakers. The new area of policy is highlighted in orange. This is called digital governance policies. This is policies on specific to online service or ICT service and internet regulations, data protection, cross-border data regulations, those kind of novel digital rules. So based on these clusters, the RDTII score, we do the average, and we found that for Asia Pacific, which we cover. So far, we are in the first pilot phase. We cover 21 pilot countries, having very different from Singapore on one end to Nepal on the other end. So in that spectrum, I order country by income level. So you have Singapore on one end and Nepal on the other end. These diverse characters of countries also comes with diverse policy environment. But what is very, first, what we can detect from this graph is the blue part, which is the traditional trade policy measures, is generally low in this region. This is because the region has been quite successful in trade liberalization, especially trade in goods, which also affect ICT goods. So generally, we are quite okay compared to the other clusters, but still you can detect that certain countries having high gaps there. There are even Korea or Cambodia, that kind of the right end, have high measures on traditional policy as well. The second cluster, which is domestic regulation, this part actually got more concerning scores than what we see in the digital policies. I was surprised when I saw these results, because before we do the study, we would listen from the public debates, right? A lot of hot conversation is about data protections, so on and so forth, in internet rules. But in fact, the data that we have draw us back to the concern that probably there are still analog rules that we need to also address, because those analog rules is blocking digital economies in the region. What are these the analog rules? Telecom, competition in telecom markets, IP rules, and procurements, foreign direct investments. These rules in many parts of the region is set as horizontal. So its effects quite across the board, and it can affect more deeper than digital rules, because all kind of firms is affecting. Digital rule itself is also high, and it's very fluid. When we've been seeing it at the midway between the three clusters, right? But keep it in mind that this is very new area. So new regulation come in on a daily basis. So once we do another update, maybe next year, probably score on these digital rules might get up quite quickly. And it's quite a mess as well at the domestic level, because when we reach out to countries, many in the rooms here are my colleagues who are RDTII focal points. When we ask for verifying the data that related to digital rules, they come back and say, okay, this is go over many ministries, and very hard to get information even at the national level itself. So it's quite dusty area and need a lot of coordination, not only between countries, but within domestic economy itself. In terms of domestic regulations and digital governance, as you can see, is that it's not only low income or middle income that they have a lot of interventions. In fact, these two areas also carry high proportion relative to other clusters, even in the case of high income countries. So it means it's captured quite a large proportion of policy portfolio in every country in the sample size. This graph is the results after we map between policy situations, the degree of interventions, and the similarity of interventions across 21 pilot economies. Then we can see quite clear two groups that I put it in a circles. There are policy areas that on average, Asia Pacific tends to have relatively low interventions and high similarity. So that is on the right bottom of the figures, that group. These are basically a lot of policies on traditional trade measures. That's about standards, that's about NTMs, about tariff, and also IP rules. So this set is quite good news for the regions. Then go toward the left part, we see concerning areas which is marked as low similarities and high RDTI scores. So that group are particularly about foreign direct investment, public procurement, domestic data protection, and policies about internet intermediary liability. This is the concerning areas because a lot of interventions were observed, plus the interventions are very diverse. So if we talk about what would be the roadmap for enhancing regulatory cooperations, we would see that the quick wins would be the group of policies on the right bottom, where countries are already established common mechanism, common frameworks, common ideas. This area would be a quick wins, and then move further toward the left is where challenging area for further efforts. But already the regions have many existing initiatives that can be a mechanisms, both at the global level and the regional level. Actually, the concepts in the WTO are still applicable. For example, many domestic regulation should be addressed under its concept of TRIMs or TRIPS or international treaty with already provided guidelines. So that can be the benchmark. And then at the regional level, we have CPTPP, we have DEPA, we have RCEP that increasingly, and some of that already go quite extensive to provide benchmark for it. Of course, the level of binding commitment is different, but in general, it could provide a platform for harmonizing and creating interoperable rules. This would be all the highlights for Asia Pacific. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Witada, for attempting to go through a complex framework, right, of results, right? I think this is nice. I particularly like the comment on domestic regulations versus also new digital governance areas, right? Always we go back to basics, right? Domestic regulations that relates to both digital and also non-digital, right? Affects, you know, how effectively you can engage on the digital front, right? So this is, I think, something maybe Henry will comment on as well, because I'm very happy to inform Henry Gao arrived. So welcome, Henry. ECLAC or Simon? Simon? Okay, Simon, please.
Thank you very much, Jan. I think maybe I'll take this. Yeah, so thank you so much, Jan. Thank you so much, Witada and ESCAP at large for hosting this 3 days workshop, and also to have been taking the lead in the preparation of the report that we are launching today. Before I go into the presentation, just also to say that we do have a fair number of participants online. I see that we have close to 70 already, particularly a fair number from Africa, and it's quite early in some part of the continent. So thank you so much for connecting already, and I'm sure the numbers are going to go up as we move forward. And good morning to you in Africa. Good afternoon to you here in the room. And so I will just provide a quick snapshot of what the report says for Africa. This one. Yeah, now it's moving. Perfect. So just to provide a very quick background on the African region to differentiate from the start with what we can observe in Asia and the Pacific, so that we see that across the world, in average, 68% of the population has access to the internet. But then when you zoom on Africa, then that falls to 40% of the African population that has access to internet. And it's very different from one country to another. You have a country like Somalia where the internet access is only 2% of the population, and a country like Morocco where almost all the entire population is covered. These are numbers from the International Telecommunication Union, which is a UN body, and they are the latest numbers that we can find. Earlier, the World Bank has estimated in 2020 what would be the cost to connect all the population in Africa, and it would actually require over $100 billion investment to make sure we have the infrastructure to connect everyone on the continent. But we have seen that with digitalization is accelerating, and that particularly also in the context of COVID-19. That is true across the world, but it's particularly true in Africa. So according to the GSM Association, 2/3 of the worldwide transaction made through mobile phones were actually made in Africa in 2021. So this is quite an important number to highlight and a huge progress compared to what we had observed before. We undertake also a series of surveys jointly with the International Economic Consulting based in Mauritius to measure the impact of COVID-19 on African businesses. On the last survey that we undertook, which was in April 2021, you can see that almost 2/3 of the respondents, so the companies who responded to the survey, did indicate that they accelerated their digital transformation. So whether they were in the process of acquiring the necessary technology or tools to use digital means, they have been training their staff to digitalization, and some of them even developed new products that they can sell online when they were not doing so before. And so I think it is very clear from all this that in Africa, there is a huge lack in terms of infrastructure for digital trade. But what we also know is that you can have the infrastructure that you want. If you don't have an environment that enables the utilization of digital trade, then you are not going to go very far. And so this has been the motivation for us to work with ESCAP and with ECLAC in collecting data through national experts. Some of them are actually with us in the room. Others are connected online. I can see some of the names of the people who contributed to this initiative, and we are very grateful to all of them. And with the information that we have been collecting with them, we are now in better position to understand what is the situation when it comes to the environmental framework, the framework of digital trade and regulatory environment in Africa today. So what we have been covering so far, which is the scope of the African countries that are covered in the report, which we are launching today, the RDTII 2.0. We have covered 28 African countries. And here you have the detail in each of the 5 sub-regions in Africa. So in Central Africa, we have 5. In Eastern Africa, 7. Western Africa, we are covering 7 also. Southern Africa, 8. And Northern Africa, 1. But just to say that more is ongoing because we are finalizing a 3rd phase So we started with 11 countries in the first phase in 2021. Then in 2022, we covered another 17 countries. So that made the 28 that we have here, and which is the coverage of African countries in the report. But we are also now working on an additional 13 countries, and we will have the work finalized next month. It's really at the final stage now. And then after that, so around April, so especially for those who are listening, we are going to put out a call for application for the fourth phase to cover the 13 remaining African countries, so that we, by the end of this year, we would have been able to cover the entire continent through this initiative. When it comes to the results themselves, and you will see more in the report, of course, we are also going to have an Africa focused session just after this, and we are very pleased to have this session with speakers from the continent who have contributed to the initiative that will also join us in the room. And we hope that we'll have even more people connected online to follow. And so we'll provide more detail in that session. We'll unpack really the results. But for now, just to stay at the surface, what we see, and Witada already mentioned that the global RDTII score for the 28 countries that we have covered in Africa so far is 0.34. So that's a bit less than in Asia and the Pacific, and more than Latin America and the Caribbean. But we have to be careful when we interpret that overall number, because that hides a lot of disparities. And in addition, what we see for Africa, for example, is that Africa is not overly restrictive, because obviously the score would be much higher if there would be much more restrictions to digital trade integration on the continent. But, and what is important is when you look at the comparison across the main regions, we see that Africa is actually the one that has the fewest in average again, and for the 28 countries that are in our sample, is the region that has the least enabling measures for digital trade integration. So I think that's particularly important to emphasize too. And then this is to give you an idea. So you have the yellow line here is the average for Africa, so the 0.34, and then you have the score for each of the countries, of each of the 28 countries that we have been covering so far. So you have a wide range of performance between Egypt, who seems to be from the overall indicator score, and I want to emphasize that because when you dig into each country, you can see pros and cons, and areas where the country is doing well and areas where the country is not doing so well. And so Egypt seems to be the one performing the least from the sample that we have, and Botswana is the best performer when it comes to enabling digital trade integration in Africa. And but again, as I was saying, you need to look into the countries. And so in the report, we do exactly that. We go pillar by pillar of the index. Witada and you also, Jan, have presented the 12 pillars of the index. So we show across pillar what is the score for each of the countries and where the countries seems to be performing well and where they don't perform so well. So I'm not going to talk about it now, but we will come back on it with a lot of details and country-specific example in the next session that will have an Africa focus. Just to, and I think this is the most important, and that's going to be my last slide, which is very similar to what Witada has presented, but interestingly, it's quite different. If we would put in parallel the graph that maybe we should have done that, but you can see it in the report. If you put in parallel the two graphs for Africa and Asia and the Pacific, then you would observe important differences. And that is something that is quite interesting because, the overall score is very similar, but then across pillar and across countries is very different. And that actually changes the picture when you go into the details. So here again, on the vertical axis, so you have the average score of the group, so the 28 African countries for the RDTII, the Regional Digital Trade Integration Index. And the lower the score, the best it is in terms of the potential to integrate into digital trade on the continent. And the higher, the worse it is, the more difficult, more challenging it is to integrate in those in digital trade. On the horizontal axis, so it's a different reading, so it's similarities. So the more you go on the right, so the higher the score, the best it is. It means that there is not much heterogeneity across countries. It's quite similar, and it means that the score of the countries are very close to the average. While on the left-hand side, the lower the score for the similarity, the more the heterogeneity. So it means that there is a large disparity and variation across countries. So that means that here also, what is in green is what is positive, looks positive at the moment. And what is in red is where we feel that attention is required, because that is where we observe that the score of the RDTII is a bit too high, and the disparity is also very high across countries. I just took note when Witada was presenting, and just to show you an example. For example, in red we have pillar 1 for Africa, but this is very much on the right and bottom side in Asia and the Pacific. So tariffs are not an issue for Asia and the Pacific, but they are in the African regions. IPR, you see that they are at the border of the red circle there, and in Asia and the Pacific, then it's in the green circle. So it means that there is actually a more protective frameworks to IPR in Asia and the Pacific that we can find in Africa, because many of the countries in Africa are not signatories to the main IPR agreements that protect copyrights and other issues that have to do with intellectual property rights. And so I'll finish on that. Just a few recommendations. Jan already gave common recommendations that we find, that we can say that they tend to be recommendations that apply to the 3 regions. But we also find that there are recommendations that are very specific to African countries. You will have more in the report, and it's more elaborated than what I'm going to say now. But essentially, we see, and that's particularly true for the red circle there, we feel that there is a need for some degree of harmonization of digital regulation at continental level. So that could be done through the EU digital transformation strategy, where there is as part of the digital strategy. And we have a colleague from the African Union Commission who is here and who is going to moderate the next session. There is an harmonization strategy that is being put together, and we are providing insight to the strategy with the data that we have been collecting. And we also feel that that information can be very useful as African countries are negotiating a protocol on digital trade as part of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, and the negotiation are ongoing, actually just starting on digital trade. And then in terms of areas to prioritize, again, they are the ones that are in the red circle. So reducing intra-African tariffs on ICT goods, that's something that is very important to do. To also adopt framework and make sure that they are enforced to protect intermediary liability, to also allow for more competition in the telecom sector in many African countries, and improve management of content access. We can see that a lot of we observe a number of restrictions, websites, social medias that are blocked, and that overall can really undermine digitalization and digital trade on the continent. And then, and this is to not forget that digital trade seems to be very positive, but we also have to be mindful that there are also privacy issues, and this needs to be protected. And so in Africa, we see that there are not framework that are strong enough to protect data privacy. And this is something that is very important, because if the consumer doesn't feel protected, then the consumer, he or she, will not go online and buy goods using digital means. So I'll stop on this. And again, in the report, we really unpack the results. And in the next session that we will have right after this one, we will take you through some of the key results, and even at country level, where we'll have country case studies that we'll be speaking to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think your presentation really make us all want to go and read the report. At least that's the feeling, because it's very intriguing. In fact, when you compare like with Ala's presentation and results and with the African one you presented, I mean, I think it's really interesting. And so because of time constraint, and we really, I won't make more comments, except maybe one at this point. I think it's important. When you read the report, right? Actually, I don't think we have an agreement on what is the optimal index value, right? So it really depends on your overall policy objective, right? Do you want, I mean, should you all strive to get index regional digital trade integration index of 0.2, or should be 0.5 or 0.6? Actually, we don't have an answer on this, right? Because regulations are also useful, right? And so that's something that is that I want to emphasize, right? We are not really telling, if you have a 0.6, you're really bad, right? Is a 0.6, you're very different from a country that have 0.3 and 4. So maybe you need to reflect on why you're different, and maybe you can do some changes if you want to make the compliance cost to your regulation lower, right? So that's all we are saying. Let me move on to invite ECLAC, right? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nanne Mulder. I am the Chief of the International Trade Unit in the Division of International Trade and Integration of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. I would have liked to be with you in person, but unfortunately I couldn't travel, and also because of the large time difference, I have pre-recorded this presentation. So in the next couple of 5 minutes, I would like to tell you a little bit about the digital trade policy environment in Latin America and the Caribbean. But first of all, I would like to thank ESCAP and UN-ECA for co-organizing this workshop with ECLAC. I also thank Witada and Simon in particular for our joint team effort, and for Jan Duval for chairing this session. Since 2021, the United Nations ECLAC has collected, compiled, and analyzed data for the regulatory environment for digital trade in Latin America and the Caribbean. Until December, 20 out of 33 countries were covered in the analysis in 2 phases. Currently, we are adding another 5 to 8 countries to our sample. The presentation of today summarizes some of the key findings and highlights similarities and differences among the LAC countries. The contribution of ECLAC to this webinar is the fruit of a team effort by 11 junior researchers, supervised mainly by Martina Ferracane, to whom I am very grateful, to her and the whole team. So, first of all, I would like to present a broad overview of digital policy in Latin America and the Caribbean. And as you can see, and as is known and presented already by Witada, the LAC average RDTII score is 0.25, which is below the global average of 0.31. The main impediments to digital trade in Latin America and the Caribbean are, in descending order, intermediate reliability, telecom infrastructure and competition, foreign direct investment, and domestic data policies. And these are shown in the figure here below. 2 of these areas are in the domain of data governance, and 2 other areas belong to the so-called other domestic policies. Now, when it comes down to traditional trade policies, there are a few restrictions in place in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, when we look at the individual scores of the countries, and if we subdivide them into different subregions, the Caribbean, Central America, and South America, we can see that there is quite a large heterogeneity among the countries in the subregions. And we see that the scores range from 0.12 for the case of Panama, the lowest one, to 0.60 in the case of Cuba, which is the highest. And among the countries that have been included in the sample, 20 countries, 13 have a score which is below the overall LAC average, which reflects the fact that few countries drive the average of the region, in particular Cuba and Venezuela. And as you can also see in these figures, is that in general, South American countries restrict somewhat more digital trade than countries in Central America and the Caribbean. Although, as mentioned, Cuba is clearly an exception in this sub-regional average. Now, what is the potential for regulatory cooperation in the region? As we've seen in Witada's presentation before, and we will do a similar exercise here, to answer this question, I present the figure in this slide, which actually compares the average RDTI pillar level scores plotted on the vertical axis and the level of policy similarity among all LAC countries for each pillars, and this is plotted on the horizontal axis. Policy similarity within the group is calculated as before as the average of bilateral differences of each indicator score within each pillars. The higher scores reveal higher similarity across countries within a pillar, while lower scores indicate a higher disparity across countries. And pillars with higher RDTI scores often tend to have also the largest heterogeneity among the 20 countries. Now, when we look at the vertical axis, we see that the pillar scores range from 0.12, pillar 9, to 0.49 in the case of pillar 8. And as mentioned, the main impediments are in the area of digital trade integration in two areas. Firstly, domestic regulations, and pillar 5 on telecom regulations and competitions. And also in pillar 3 related to foreign direct investment. Second, there are also important restrictions in the area of data governance measures. One is pillar 7 on domestic data protection and privacy, and second on internet intermediary liabilities. And each of these pillars has a score above the regional average score of 0.25. Now, when we focus on the horizontal axis, there are 4 pillars with the highest heterogeneity among the countries that have also the highest RDTI scores. So in sum, what we can conclude is that harmonization efforts could be most relevant in those pillars because they both are highly restricted areas for digital trade in Latin America, and also these pillars show a large heterogeneity with regards to the regulations among the countries in Latin America. Now, when we go to the other side, we see that there are also policy areas with lower restrictions and a higher regulatory similarity that exist in the regions. And some areas that comply with this case are pillar 6 for cross-border data policies, pillar 9, and pillar 10 and 11 related to non-technical NTMs and also standard and procedures. So these are low-hanging fruits for potential regional collaboration for regulatory harmonizations, given that there's little heterogeneity among the countries, and also that restrictions are relatively few in these particular areas. Now, just to conclude, I just showed you some of the results of the work in Latin America and the Caribbean, and to just say a few words on areas to move forward and areas for collaboration. I would say just 2 words. First, it would be useful to maybe introduce reform in the telecommunications sectors, which is the backbone of providing digital goods, and also for e-commerce related to goods, international trading goods. And what is required in this area is reforms that include reducing discriminatory requirements to obtain licenses, attaching the WTO telecom reference paper to the country schedules and commitment, and introducing a functional separation of operators within with significant market powers to increase competition in these sectors. And also, I would like to mention that it would be useful to step up regulatory convergence and cooperations through trade organizations and agreements at the sub-regional level. And here I refer in particular to the Central American Common Market, the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, the Pacific Alliance, and Mercosur. Now, all of these integration schemes do have digital agendas, but only few of them include concrete commitments to harmonize digital regulations. In this context, there is a need to promote greater sub-regional and regional cooperation and coordinate some of the policies in the area of digital trade. And one mechanism to do this is the Ministerial Conference on the Information Society in Latin America and the Caribbean, also called ECLAC, which brings together the governments of the 33 countries in the region. And its 2022-2024 digital agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the vehicles that can bring about more coordination efforts, including in the area of digital trade regulations. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Nano and ECLAC for this. Again, another very interesting presentation. One thing I was actually trying to find out, what is the pillar that was behind Nano's picture when he was talking, right, in the slide. And actually it turned out because it's pillar 6, I understand, which is cross-border data restriction. And it's interesting to see it on the chart, right, of similarity versus compliance cost, right, because it's toward the bottom. And that means that cross-border data regulations in Latin America are not so much of an issue, right? Which is something that we talk a lot about, right, all the time, but not so much of an issue, it seems, Latin America compared to maybe in Asia, at least some Asian countries, and in Africa. So again, some lessons to be learned across the region here. We have 3 minutes to go according to the official time of the launch, right? And so we definitely have time, and you can take more than 3 minutes if you want, right, Henry, to provide your comments and feedback on what you heard in the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yen. Just to clarify, I only have 3 minutes, or?
I think you can take up to 6 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I will try to keep within 6 minutes. I will start by thanking Yen and Witada for kindly inviting me to this. And I want to congratulate the 3 regional commissions for doing this highly interesting, highly useful cross-regional comparison between the 3 different regions on the challenges faced. I think this work is really needed, and I hope that this work can also be presented to a wider audience, probably before the WTO and the UNCTAD, for example. Now, because of time constraint, I'm going to focus on a few specific issues which I picked up when I was reading the draft report and also the presentation. The first one is the high cost of domestic compliance, as Witada mentioned, and also other speakers also mentioned in their presentation, the fact that the non-trade disciplines, such as those on competition, procurement, and so on, would also have a high cost on digital trade. So this definitely highlights the need for coordination between different ministries within the same country. And actually, I also got this impression firsthand when I was advising a few countries in the region. And I'm glad that, for example, some of the countries that I advised were able, where the trade ministry was able to pull together the other line ministries in this work in the review of the digital trade regulations. So that is really helpful. I hope more countries in the region can do that. Now, how do we make more line ministries be aware of this issue? I think a good way is probably for the colleagues. I assume most of the colleagues who are here today are from the Trade and Commerce Ministry. So I think the burden is now on you to try to come up with rules, either in the WTO, in the context of the GSI negotiation on e-commerce, and also in the regional trade agreements on digital trade, that would include not only traditional trade issues such as tariff and free flow data, but also include the issues that are covered by your colleagues' ministries, such as competition, such as consumer protection and so on. So if you put them into international rules, I think the resistance would be much lesser, and you would have an easier time persuading your colleagues. And second, in the presentation by the African Commission, you raise the very interesting phenomena of both the challenge and also the opportunity created by the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic, of course, was a big crisis, but many countries were able to turn this crisis into the opportunity to try to springboard, the digital transformation. And we see this in Africa. Now, that is very good. My concern is that whether, with now the pandemic has now subsided. Actually, I saw it firsthand today, when I was trying to get a taxi in Bangkok, because last year, when I was here in November, it was so easy to get a taxi because the streets were deserted. But nowadays, it took me like 1 hour to just get a taxi, which is why I was late. I'm really sorry, Yan. I wasn't prepared for this. So the lesson is that after the pandemic, everybody is back into the streets again, into physical, physical business. And the people seem to forget that they now have this option of, using their phone to conduct the digital trade, digital business. And I really hope that, people in the developing world would not really forget this and would instead try to explore more of the potentials of digital trade and e-commerce. My third point is regarding the interesting comparison between different RDTII scores. Again, this was illustrated by the African presentation. I think what I kind of guess I would like to confirm from my colleagues from Africa is whether the different scores is also a function of the different levels of development. Because for Africa, for example, you see that actually Egypt has a higher scores, while Botswana has the lowest scores. I assume that Egypt would be at a much higher level of economic development, and therefore, the government start to pay attention to these issues and introduce more regulations. While if the sector is totally undeveloped, the bureaucrats will not even pay attention to the sector. So this also brings up to another point, and that is whether or not the lessons from one region would be applicable across different regions. I mean, I think most developed countries in the world really look up to China as a model, for the digital transformation, for development of e-commerce and digital trade. But actually, I'm afraid that some of these countries might be drawing the wrong lessons, because they see, for example, China has a restrictive policy on data flow, and they see that China has so many, big digital giants like Alibaba, like Tencent, and so on. And they draw a causation between the two. They think that exactly because China was able to shield all these domestic firms from foreign competition, therefore China was able to grow. And my experience of researching on Chinese e-commerce development for the 20 years has told me that no, that is the wrong lesson. Actually, the lesson is exactly to the contrary. China was able to succeed not because of all these restrictive data policies, but despite of these restrictive policies. China's success is largely because China is such a huge market, 1.4 billion people. Whatever they do, they are going to be number one, But for most developed countries, which are much smaller, you have a few million people. If you close your doors, I don't think you will get the same digital giants as China. Instead, you will really suffer. So I hope that, in drawing the lessons, we should be more careful. My next point is on tariffs. Now, if you compare across the three different regions, you see that tariff was not a main issue for Asia Pacific and Latin America, but it's a big issue for Africa. I was wondering whether this is simply a function of different levels of regional economic integration across the 3 different regions. Because if you look at Asia Pacific and Latin America, they already had a long history of regional economic integration, like Mercosur, right? Here, ASEAN. But in Africa, we only just conclude the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and it has yet to be implemented. So I guess that also explains the difference in the level of tariffs. And my last point, and here I actually concur with what Yan said. You know, the different scores, which ones are good, which ones are bad. I mean, I'm a professor, you know, so for me, 60, at least 60 would be good, right? Because that is the grade you need to pass the course. But I don't think we should take such a simplistic review on the scores, like Yan has kindly pointed out. Instead, I think the purpose of all these different scores and the advantage of having all these scores is basically to tell the policymakers, to help them to understand what are the policy implications of different policy choices so that they can choose what they need to achieve their policy objectives. Too often, policymakers, when they make digital trade policies, they are unaware of the spillover effect or the negative externalities of their policies. And instead, they didn't pay attention to that. And I hope that policymakers really can read the report and see that, for example, when you adopt restrictive policies on certain issues such as high tariffs, such as high barriers, for example, for IPR and so on, this could have an impact on digital trade, on e-commerce development, and therefore this will guide their policy choice. I mean, like Yan, I also understand that we are not advocating a specific score, but instead, if you want to achieve a specific result, you need to understand better which policies would lead to the result you want and which policies would have the contrary effect. So without further ado, I would conclude here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You made it in 10 minutes exactly, which is perfect. Thank you very much. I mean, Professor Gao is obviously one of the world leading experts in digital trade policy, and so we're very grateful that you could come and comment on the report. And then we'll definitely seek your advice and guidance on the further development of the initiative. Thank you again. Because we are really out of time, I'm hesitating. There's a few questions that came online. Maybe they can be taken up in in future sessions, right? I mean, really, this is a very introductory one. This is really made to make you download the report. Hopefully, you got the link, right? And then now we're going to unpack some of the results in the different sessions. So I will leave you there. I thank all the participants. What? Sorry? Oh, yes. We do need to show the portal that is upcoming. So please go ahead, Simon. Give us a feel about this upcoming portal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yan. And thank you so much, Prof. Gao. I think you raise important points. We don't have much time to discuss them, but I think, as Yan said, we'll be taking them in the next sessions. I've taken note of what you said, and I think they were the point of Egypt, Botswana. We, in fact, have our representative from Egypt who is here in the room, and she's going to tell us exactly what we see is challenging and less challenging in Egypt to understand what could be the priority actions. But we have also seen the question on the chat, and we'll take them in the next session. But very briefly indeed, we developed a joint platform where you are going to be able to freely access all the information that we have been collecting through the 3 regions. Here it's only a demo. The final URL or internet address we'll share with all of you, whether you are here in the room or connected online. We have your contact details, and we'll be able to share with you as soon as it is officially out so that you can access it. But this is how it's going to be looking like. Very, very briefly. You will get to this landing page, which is a common page for all the 3 regions. And you will have information about the initiative, you know, what are the objectives, what are the type of information we are collecting, And then you will be able to click on any of the 3 regions that you are interested in exploring. You can do it from the bottom, you can do it from the top. So if you want to go to Asia and the Pacific, then you just click here, and then you have an home page also that explains what are the objectives for the Asia and Pacific regions, because they actually are different from one region to another. There are different priorities, there are different objectives. And then you also have the possibility to access the data. We have two types of data. The one we presented today, which is about the report, is the regional digital trade integration. So you would click here, and then you can click on any of the countries that have been covered, and you will get insight here in terms of what is the overall score, what is the score for each of the pillars, and underneath each of the pillars, you can actually click and expand to get more information. You can download the data in Excel format, and then we also have another type of data set which is related to digital services trade restrictions. This is the work we are doing that Jan mentioned with the OECD. They have the Digital Services Trade Restrictiveness Index, and so the same. You click on a country, you will get the detail. The overall score. In fact, for this one, we have it annually. So from 2014 to 2021. So if you click the year, then that changes. And there is a link at the bottom to actually go on the simulator of the OECD, where you can do comparison and downloading all the raw data behind this type of measures. We have country profiles. So you have the flag of the country, and as soon as it will be uploaded, then you will be able to download the specific country profile for the country that you are interested in. We have publications. So here in the case of ESCAP, there is the RDTII 1.0. There is also a joint publication that we had with OECD that you can find on the Africa section, but I'm sure we'll add it also here on the Asia section. And you can go back to the main page. You can have the same type of information for Africa. I will unpack that in the next session. I will show you more what we have under the Africa portal, Latin America and the Caribbean. And then we have also the partners, OECD, the European University Institute, important links to specific initiative at ESCAP, at ECLAC, and at ECA in relation to the Digital Trade Initiative. And then if you want to contact us, then you will have our email addresses here, and you can just reach out to us. And you have the portal available in English, in French, and also in Spanish, so that everyone from the 3 regions can really benefit from it and go there. And we really invite you to go as soon as it will be online. We'll share with you again the link, and so that you can access all this information.
Thank you very much, Simon, for this very comprehensive presentation. And I think it looks very promising. So I'm not going to ask you the exact date of launch, but it's coming. I mean, it's in process. So let me ask everyone to thank our speakers and discussants. And